Welcome to the Estates Made Simple podcast with Jenna and Gordon Vanderleek. We are on a mission to simplify the world of estate administration, helping executors gain the knowledge required to manage an estate. Please note, the following is for informational purposes only and is not to be considered legal, tax, or financial advice. We recommend you seek individualized advice for your unique situation with qualified professionals.
Welcome to another episode of Estates Made Simple. Today, we are very excited to bring a special guest on, Robert Price, the CEO of Bode Canada. Bode is really changing the way property is bought and sold in Canada, and Gordon and I wanted to bring this information to the executors who are listening to our podcast. They are often required to sell a property within an estate, and I think Bode would be an excellent resource for them to assist in that process while maximizing the estate value for the beneficiary. So welcome, Robert. We're very pleased to have you today.
Fantastic to be here.
Yeah, Robert, first of all, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. And it might be helpful for our listeners to learn a little bit more about Bode Canada. So why don't we start with just that, how did Bode come about, a little bit of overview of those services, and then we can zero in on the relevance for executors, as Jenna has mentioned.
Yeah, perfect. So this company really came from my own experience in real estate, buying and selling myself back in 2017, where I was looking for an online way to find properties and sell my own property. That didn't really exist. And so I did what most people do and hired an agent, and then found that I was doing a lot of the intellectual work, the negotiations, the pricing. I found the property that I wanted to buy myself online, and then wrote a $50,000 check at the end and said that was insane. But I'm in a different company and I'm doing other things. Fast forward a year and came back to that same issue following the sale of our previous company and said, is that still happening? Is the industry still charging serious money for what I would describe as administrative services? And upon research and talking to my agent at the time, it had certainly continued on to where it was. So he and I, the guy that actually helped me buy and sell those properties, sold his brokerage and joined Bode to start with two other founders this business, really with the vision of modernizing real estate transactions, making it very easy for buyers and sellers to connect, communicate, and even negotiate and purchase fully online with all the data and all the tools and exposure that a realtor provides today without requiring a realtor. So really focusing first on the individual homeowners in Canada, starting in Calgary. We're now in Alberta, BC, and Ontario, and then also working with a number of builder and large developers, over 70 of them across the country as well, who have new property and want to offer a exceptional buying experience with that property. So we're now at $1 billion of total property sales, which we're very proud of. Announced that a couple weeks ago. We're venture funded. We're very much excited to have a true and lasting impact and modernization on the industry, and are now getting into the executor conversation. And that came about by some homeowners finding our services and taking advantage of, in the case where they're an executor, using our platform to sell these properties with the benefit of saving significantly on the commission side, as well as maximizing value while giving transparency to others involved in the estate. So we're now beginning to work with a number of professional services as well. But that's the quick backdrop of us.
And so if I'm acting as an executor, can you take me through the process that I could expect if I was listing a property with Bode versus a traditional standard realtor relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's quite simple. You're able to list your property in about 10 minutes. If you think of beds and baths and square footage, we take care of professional photos and measurements for the homeowner. So you send a professional out and we upload those into your listing. Once your listing's complete, we market your property on Realtor.ca, on Zillow, and 1,000 other websites that are syndicated through that network, where 96% of buyers are shopping today. And then we also provide QR-based signage. So you have all of the marketing avenues elevated through that experience. And then buyers find your listing on any of these listing sites, including Bode itself, and are able to book showings, message you as the seller, and ultimately make offers to you upon sale. All of that's free. It's 1% upon sale to the seller and free to buy. So if a buyer makes an offer and completes the purchase without representation, we're talking a total of 1% versus typical 4 to 5% in Canada, and savings. We've done deals that have saved over $100,000, but our typical average is that $15,000 range. So our feedback has been, of course, we're building the company. We're now in the scale up mode, planning to add more provinces and ultimately expand to the US with this approach. But the overall gain is control, ease, automation, and then ultimately the financial success.
Do you find that your kind of ideal client is one that has to be more engaged or they want to be more engaged? What about the person that says, you know what, I don't know anything about this, is out of my wheelhouse, as the saying goes, and it scares me to be, you know, putting the suit on and negotiating, so to speak, or I have to be involved with all this stuff. And I just want to hire somebody to do it because I don't feel I have those skill sets. Many people of our viewers who are maybe in the role of executor find themselves as going, I just don't get it. Some may be the controlling type who want to say, I want to be really roll up the sleeves and get involved in negotiating, and that gets me excited and I enjoy that process. But there's some that don't. Maybe for those people listening, give a little bit of a description of what's the process like and what the experience is like in terms of how much work they have to and how much on the front lines are they.
Yeah, it actually ends up being less work because you no longer have to communicate with a middle person all the time, meeting for coffees. They need to come over to your house. You have these conversations, you share back and forth through various communication channels. You can just apply the information you already know. And that, so I would say it's a great question. It's been interesting to watch the kinds of demographics that have been attracted to this. We've had some, let's say, 50 plus crowd who have done 4 or 5 transactions before and fully have said, this is not as complicated as I've been told that it is. This is actually something I could definitely do if I had all the tools at my disposal. So it's been interesting to have that a big portion of our sellers look like that. And then the others, which was really our target, were called the millennial and the tech savvy, especially tech savvy generation, where they prefer to transact this way as long as they have the market data. And I think that's the pivotal question here. And the pivotal point is if you have access to the same sold records and comparable information to select your value, now you have the confidence to set the price in. And then the platform essentially does the rest for you because you're not fundamentally selling your home. It's a discriminating buyer's market, right? The buyer is deciding whether or not they like your home based on the presentation online. That will attract them to do a tour of the property or a virtual tour in some cases. And then they're going to decide based on that what they think makes sense. It's not really the seller selling the property in a direct sales fashion. It is an online aggregation of inventory that attracts discriminating buyers. So it really isn't more challenging than Airbnb in your property or selling something on Kijiji at the end of the day, because we have all the tools that you would get otherwise. You just get to apply them directly and efficiently.
And before we started this podcast and recording, you had mentioned a few things which I found very interesting and beneficial to the stakeholders of estates. So one being that the average sale price is higher than the traditional methods. And the other being that your platform allows beneficiaries of an estate to see the progress, the listing, the showings, and all of the necessary details. So can you speak a little bit more about that? Because I think that's really interesting for estate management here in Canada.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see something we didn't expect when we started the company. If you think of the way the traditional model works, with commissions as high as they are, that last $50,000, let's say on $1 million property, $950,000 versus $1 million is not a big change to commission. It's tens of thousands of dollars of commission and hundreds of dollars of change for that last 50,000 versus a homeowner, that's 50,000 of tax-free equity. And that 50,000 matters a lot to them, especially in the inflationary times that we're in and everything else that is going on in Canada with income to inflation challenges. So what we find is because we're empowering our homeowners to make those decisions, our model isn't to tell you what to do or represent you. Our model is to empower you. Our homeowners actually achieve that 1.3% higher than the average traditional method. So on $1 million property, they're making another $13,000. And that's all real money. That's tax-free money for people. So that's one surprising but exciting point that we've learned through starting the company. And then the visibility often in our, and you guys would be are obviously expert on this, but the ability for somebody to lead the sale of the property with their 2 or 3 siblings and have full visibility just through account attachment to that listing of everybody else keeps everybody in lockstep on what's going on, how many showings have been booked, what offers have come in at what pricing, and how do we make decisions. That's all real time notifications straight to email for anybody involved. So that cuts the back and forth down and also gives everybody that full transparency into what's going on. In a highly emotional time, that's a big warming factor in our experience for anybody that ends up in that executor chair.
It's a way to automate the communication process of what's going on with regard to at least that aspect of the administration of the estate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's another, it's a great example where technology is powerful. Like in my mind, it's still the homeowner making the judgments and making the decisions. It's making it all easier and faster in order to get to those points of decision. Because even if you're working the traditional model, the agent isn't making decisions for you. Whether it's on the buy side or the sell side, you are making the decisions. They are providing information to you. So if you can do that in a really powerful, synthesized way, in a tech-enabled experience, that's where everybody that sold us has really gushed about our service, which is really our passion, is to deliver an amazing experience.
When you're looking at going through that process, take me through, like you mentioned, offers, and we can see that, I presume, some sort of a portal. You can see what's going on and the responses with all this. Is the system sort of generating the standard agreement of purchase and sale? That I think has traditionally been seen as the role of the realtor, is to be skilled at putting an agreement in place. And looking at it from a legal perspective, that obviously is the foundation of that contractual relationship, which is an important part of that real estate transaction. So does Bode facilitate all of that? So you end up with an agreement of purchase and sale, perhaps with conditions that then can be waived, and then we have a binding agreement, and then it goes off to the lawyer to, I presume that, I guess the second part of my question is, I'm assuming then it just gets handed to the whole process of the conveyancing is still traditional, that you would retain your own lawyer, and once the agreement is finalized through your system.
You did a better job of explaining it than I probably will. But yes, so that's exactly the way that we've designed a online way to make the offer. So all the pricing, terms, timing, conditions have all been built in. And when a buyer makes that offer and submits it, the seller gets an instant notification with a breakdown of all of those terms. And the seller is then able to, on a term by term basis, negotiate, agree to, or negotiate on those terms. So if they agree to everything, it automatically gets to binding or conditional agreement, because there's often conditions involved. And then we auto populate the contract, which is, as you say, an industry standard contract by province. So Alberta, BC, Ontario are all slightly different, but they're fundamentally materially the same. Actually, at the point of conveyancing, once the conditions are removed, we have a digital closing partner as well. So you no longer need to go in and wet ink signature documents. That's all digitized through to the end as well. And our partner, through our partnership, is able to offer 25% discount on that part of the experience as well. So really the end-to-end digitization of this process over a couple thousand transactions.
And from a legal perspective, maybe this is a question for Gord too. When an executor is contemplating what avenue to take, what avenue to list their property or to use a traditional method over Bode. What sort of factors do you think they need to consider when choosing which method to use?
Yeah, I think you have the when you're in the process of evaluating, I think to Gord's earlier question, there's certain people that we're not trying to be everything to everybody. So there's still obviously there's 120,000 agents in Canada. So there's lots to choose from if that's your preferred method. Really, we're attracting the people that are excited about maximizing value and aren't scared of the technology. Once they actually dig into it, our customers find that it's really not more complex than your basic online activities that we're doing all the time in the rest of our lives. And that was really the aim, is to make it easy that people would pay the same amount of money as they would pay an agent because the experience is that good or better just for a lot less money. So I think you have important for people to consider their options, but you have some clear pros and cons there to consider.
Do you find like it sounds like just to maybe pick up on an earlier point about the reach of the program? I guess for an executive, they're going, okay, ultimately I'm accountable to beneficiaries for decisions I make, and I don't want to get sued. I want to do a good job, and I might be also a beneficiary of the estate, so I want to maximize the value, but I'm also looking at my legal responsibilities in terms of going through there. It sounds, but maybe you can clarify that if we went through Bode, it's going to have a fulsome marketing profile, because one would think, who's actually going to see this? And if it's a limited audience, then maybe that wouldn't necessarily translate into 1.3 more. So my assumption is they have a good exposure. But can you just maybe address that maybe fear of this is not as good as going the traditional route, which would involve MLS, because I guess you're involved with that as well. But just maybe flesh that out a little bit, because that might be a concern going in is what's the risk to me that I don't have eyeballs seeing this listing.
Yeah, on the marketing side, if anything, we're marketing to additional buyers because the typical agent just lists on Realtor.ca. But what most people don't know is Realtor.ca is only 50% of the search market, shopping market in Canada. 20% is Zillow. And then there's another 30% of a whole bunch of other sites, including Kijiji and Facebook Marketplace and other brokerages that work off of that same network. You have to partner with them and select those options to make sure that visibility happens. We find that we actually have more demand on our listings, and that comes back to your point of the 1.3% would not be achievable if we didn't have equal to or greater demand in addition to the model of empowerment. So I think that's really what we see. And if you take a step back, 96% of people shopping online first to find properties, 96% of population doesn't do anything. Like that is literally everybody is starting there. And part of our goal is you can start shopping as a buyer and then you can stay online. Start shopping online, stay online all the way through the process, as opposed to traditionally, I found the property I want to see. Now, how do I gain access to it? You've got to call somebody, you've got to hire somebody. We want to remove that friction and ultimately provide that choice of removing that cost because even though, and this is happening in litigations in the United States, where the buy side agent is representing themselves as free to the buyer, in reality, the buyer is writing the check that the seller is then paying back to the sell agent, who's then splitting it with the buy agent. You're ultimately that the half of that cost is still in the transaction. So what we find often is on our listings where a buyer has an agent and is making an offer, and a buyer without an agent is making an offer. The buyer without the agent often wins because they have $20,000 to $30,000 less cost to the seller in that transaction. And really that's exciting to us because we're now creating choice and competition in a market that desperately needs it. So that's the picture on the marketing side. And then in terms of understanding values, we often find when a buyer and seller are connecting directly, they're using our data tools, which are the same sold information that realtors have access to because technically we are a brokerage. So now you have symmetry of they're both looking at the same information because it's the same data tools as opposed to buyer and seller representatives with their own opinions. And in the case of buy side agency, where they are variably paid, they're actually negotiating against their buyer. They're actually incentivized to make the buyer pay more, because the more the buyer pays, the more money they make. So that's where all these litigations are happening in the US and are actually happening just a little bit behind in Canada. And so our model is really where the regulations are trying to catch up to, which is make sure where the seller, you do have to invest in the marketing, in the signage, in the photography, in all of that support on the sell side. There's many countries around the world that don't have buy side agents at all. The UK doesn't have buy side agents. New Zealand, Australia, parts of Asia. It's Canada and the US are actually unique with the two agent relationship. So really what we want to do is make that democratize and then unlock the ability for buyers and sellers to take this action directly. And then the agent, if you want to add an agent, now you're acquiring those services on an as needed basis, on a value based basis, as opposed to it just being the way the industry operates. So that's a bit of the bigger picture of what we're focused on. But we obviously don't need regulatory change in order to continue to grow and scale in the way that we are. But that will be what I believe will become the global standard, is one agent transactions.
Would you think Bode Canada is a useful tool for executors to start with doing some research on what is market value? I know through the probate process, you have to put into the surrogate forms, here's the value of real estate, right? Which is sometimes, I don't know, we might have a value for municipal taxation purposes. Like in our home, in this locality, you go to the city of Calgary and the tax department says we have a fair market value of X for which we assess tax, municipal property tax. But I'm just thinking, as I'm listening to you, this may be a valuable tool. How can executors use it just to, before we do a listing, is just gather important data, which is that first part of the process of what is this thing even worth anyway, before you even figure out how you're going to list it?
Yeah, it's a big belief that we have that this is your biggest asset for the vast majority of Canadians. And most people are just in the dark about it. As you say, you get your annual tax bill. It's politically charged, so it can be above or below depending on what the needs are of the local government. So that's one time a year assessment. And then agents aren't really designed, they're not set up to provide you these values on a recurring basis. They're there to help you buy and sell property, which for most Canadians is every 5 years. So it's another, you nailed it, Gordon, in the sense of, I think of your home, obviously it has all the emotional and home feel to it and family and everything that goes with your home as a home, but the asset itself should be tracked on a regular basis because these markets are moving constantly. And so a monthly, quarterly review and check of value is actually a feature we're about to launch, so that you can do your research anytime right now with the tools we have. But the feature we're about to bring to market is, here's your monthly value assessment so you can track it. And that's obviously making you smarter about the whole process and also making it easier to document, as you say, in advance of any executor or will creation. You now have a more accurate, more reliable feel of what your property is worth, irrespective of how you decide to sell it.
How has your uptake been in, let's talk about the Alberta context, because that's certainly our audience, although this podcast could be listened to in other provinces or other countries.
Yeah, Alberta is our best province. We launched in Calgary right at the start, right before COVID. We predicted the global pandemic, perfect time to start a company. So I kid, but so that was Calgary first, and then Edmonton shortly thereafter, and then all of Alberta. So Calgary's our best market, Edmonton's our second best market. We've done a lot of rural transactions as well. Then BC and Ontario follow behind, and Ontario is quite new for us. We've been there for less than a year, I believe. So that's the market in Alberta has been very attracted to this offering, which has been exciting.
As we chat, I'm reminded about my own personal experience. I lived in Edmonton and had a condo at the time, and we chose to sell it privately. So we took our own pictures, listed it within our condo community. And I just wish that you were around 10 years ago, because imagine how many more potential buyers we could have been exposed to when we wanted to save money on the commission. So we try to do it ourselves. So I think this is a nice solution for those people who do want to do it themselves, but need the resources and tools to make a maximized sale.
Yeah, the younger generation is, all the statistics say, less and less or more and more allergic to high pressure sales, and having to have those kinds of experiences going in and buying a car. Most people now in our generation are doing that research online and would love to buy that car online if it's possible. Now, most dealers, most car makers do that. And that's a much better, more convenient experience than I'm going in and talking to a salesperson that actually knows less than me about this particular car because I've nerded out on it so much. I just want to take action. So that's, in terms of big ticket purchases, furniture, cars, and that's where we saw homes. And we're out ahead of the curve here with our company, but believe that as continue to see the market getting younger and more attracted, like millennials are now the biggest real estate buyer group in Canada, are more and more attracted to these kinds of experiences. So a lot of our inspiration came from the fantastic services we've just been using for a long time in the other parts of our lives.
Robert, it's been a great conversation. I'm reflecting, which I think I saw on your website when I looked at that ahead of time. I think your goal is to disrupt the industry, and this could be big. And I think it's appropriate for our audience to consider all options. And I think with this presentation, you've very ably described the services and maybe pique some interest. If somebody listening or watching our YouTube channel would like to know more information, how do they get a hold of you? What would be the next step to continue the conversation directly with you?
Yeah, glad it was useful. It was certainly a lot of fun. .ca is our website and our platform. So it's all designed for you to be able to understand where we are, the markets that we're in, how our services work. And of course, we have AI-based chat there, but you're also able to communicate with a person through those means as well. If you have any questions, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn as well. And yeah, I'd love to have a conversation with anybody about this. It's a passion of ours, and though we're making a lot of progress, we have big audacious goals. Continue to push towards those.
Great. Thank you. I guess inspired by your vision and your drive to bring an idea to market and bring it to fruition and be that disruptor. So we'll continue to watch your progress, encourage you with that. And thank you for sharing useful information for our audience about how executors could consider these services and discharge their responsibilities. And I think it's been a great conversation. Call it a day. Sorry, hang on here. So with that, we'll call it a day. And thank you for your participation. And for all our audience members, please subscribe if you want more interesting conversations like this so you don't miss an episode. We thank you for your support. And until next time, we wish you safety and good health.
Thank you.